Okay, so yeah, it's good to be here with you all. And I'm sort of continuing a series that we started a few weeks ago. And I was given the title of The World Turned Upside Down, which when I was given it, I was like, oh, that's interesting. And immediately I had images of, well, the impact of COVID-19 as it keeps sweeping around the world in different ways. I had the images of what's going on in Canada right now and other parts of the world, you know, with the sort of climate, the impact of climate change. I had that in my mind, and lots of other global issues that just was there as soon as I sort of heard the title. And then I also then thought of, well, actually, people's individual lives are turned upside down sometimes. And, you know, I hear about that too. And I'm sort of very conscious of that. And our lives can feel like they're turned upside down in all kinds of different ways. So, you know, a relationship coming to an end, loss of income, status, reputation, a disaster happening, all kinds of things can make our own personal lives feel like it's turning upside down. And I know at times when that's happened in my life, you know, the rest of the world looks like it's carrying on fine. And I want to say, stop, you know, things have turned upside down in my life and it's like the world just carries on. So yes, those are the things that sort of came to mind, you know, sort of suffering actually, in a nutshell, suffering and how suffering in its various different forms can really stop us in our tracks. Make us question, make us wonder, and it's just a very challenging time to be in a state of suffering. And in a way for me, I know I came into meditation and Buddhism really because I was in one of these moments where my life felt like it had turned upside down. That's definitely what brought me to the Dharma, to the teachings. And I remember feeling completely relieved when I heard that the Buddha, you know, 2,500 years ago spoke about this very directly. The first noble truth is, you know, life is suffering. And that was a relief for me because I remember thinking, oh, it's not just me then, you know. I mean, I was going through my version of it and then I realised, oh, actually, loads of people are all the time. I'm just not aware of it, you know. So that was a relief, like life is suffering and it's happening all the time and it's happened throughout time. So I was having my version of that. So that was a you know, relief. Some people find it depressing, but for me it was like, oh, it's not just me. And then the second noble truth is that there's a cause for this suffering. So again, I remember thinking, oh, because life could feel very random, like just random things happen and I never understood why. And it was like, oh, there's a cause for all of this that goes on in my life, but also in the world. And again, that was a relief. It sort of meant that, well, if there's a cause and I understand the causes and I understand the conditions, and I can do something about it. So that was great. The second noble truth, there's a cause for this suffering. So I loved Buddhism in a way fairly early on because I just thought, oh, it's addressing what I know about life so far, in that I have moments of joy, moments of where everything's great and I want to hold on to it, and then lots of moments where I don't hold on to it and it's not great and it's not fun and actually it's painful. So it addressed that directly. But then it also, the third noble truth, because there's four of them, the third one says, and there's an end to suffering. So that was a revelation too, because it was like, oh, it's not just about trying to understand the causes of suffering again and again and again. It's also, there is an end to that. There's an end to it, and the end is nirvana, this word nirvana, which I didn't really know what it meant, but it sounded good. It sounded like, that sounds nice. You can imagine an ice cream called nirvana or something like that. Sounded pleasant, sounded like blissful. And actually, as I began to understand that, then it was like, oh yes, it is. I mean, it's hard to describe. It's beyond words. But this state of nirvana. But, you know, you are talking, you know, sort of highest levels of consciousness possible for a human being to achieve, you know, with qualities like, you know, fearlessness and generosity and creativity and energy, and of course love, and of course wisdom. So it was like, oh, you can cultivate these positive states, and eventually, some time far off, perhaps, there's this state of nirvana. And then the fourth noble truth is that there's a path, there's this cultivation, there's a path you can follow. So it's not just you either have it or you don't, you cultivate it. And then, of course, the story of the historical Buddha was him steadily cultivating this path through meditation, through practice, cultivating his mind, his heart, and eventually him arriving at nirvana. So enlightenment, awakening. So that was so I was really fascinated by this, because Buddhism's got this, focus on we need to understand suffering. We need to understand why life is painful, whether it's our lives, other people's lives, the world. We need to sort of directly engage in that. But also there's this freedom, there's this state of liberation, expansiveness, which we're also needing to, there's also the possibility of engaging with that. So I was like, gosh, that's really interesting. No matter what's going on in my life, pleasant, painful, positive, negative, there's a Buddhism response to that. So that's why I'm still here, really practicing all these years later, because it gets more and more fascinating the more I journey on the path. But what's interesting is this transition from suffering to freedom, and it's actually it's not easy, this transition. In a way, we can think about suffering, and yes, the world turns upside down in suffering. It can feel like that, but actually, even transitioning to freedom, even when freedom, liberation beckons, that can also feel challenging. That can also feel like, I'm not sure I want that. I was on retreat last week, and there's one or two people here with me, which is great, from that retreat. We talked about this a little bit, that how we can, we don't really want to go into our negative, states of mind, our anger, our fear, our confusion. It's like we keep that at bay. It's difficult. We don't know how to deal with it. At the same time, we do that with our positive states too. We might not really want to really access joy. We might think we do, but when it comes, when freedom beckons, in whatever way, we can hold back from that too. So that was really interesting for me, that the transitioning from suffering to freedom is not always straightforward, and we can hold freedom at bay, even when we think we deeply want it as well. So in a way, this book that we're exploring in this series, Tales of Freedom, gives us lots of stories about people, individuals through the ages who have been making that transition from suffering to freedom, and all the things that they then encounter, all the things that they have to deal with, understand, transform to really access freedom. And that's why, it's a great book, lots of stories. If you haven't picked it up, I do recommend it. And so I'm going to be talking a little about this, about some pointers from one of the stories in this book about this transition, and hoping that there's some points that we can take away for ourselves. But when I was thinking about why is this transition from suffering to freedom, why is that difficult? Surely that's what we all want, to be happy in a sense. And then I thought of these images just came to mind. So I'm going to share these images with you and see if they resonate. But the first image that came to mind, a friend of mine, she sent me a photo recently of her. She just was going on her local walk, and there she was on her walk, and suddenly there was a hot air balloon sort of just right, there, and she took a picture and sent it to me. Now I was very captivated by this hot air balloon. And I used to live in Bristol as well, which is where, if you're in Bristol, you'll see that often on a Sunday they would have just cascades of hot air balloons in the air, and it was just beautiful. So that captured my attention, and I thought, oh yeah, when you're in a hot air, I've never been in a hot air balloon, so if you have, you can let me know if this is true. But I imagine in a hot air balloon is that you get in, and it's all really exciting to begin with, and you're very conscious as it rises of the ground. I imagine you're spending quite a bit of your time looking down at what you're leaving. Has anyone been on a hot air balloon in this room? Is that right? Get around of good. That you're very conscious of the ground. You're like, oh gosh, we're getting higher and we're getting higher, and you're still looking at the ground. But then I imagine a certain point comes where the ground just gets further and further away, and you have to let go. Is that right? Is that right? You have to let go of looking at the ground. You can no longer really see what's really there, and suddenly you're in space. You're in amongst the sky. You're looking at things from a very different vantage point, and you have to let what was down below go. So I think that's part of what goes on with this transitioning from suffering to freedom. We have to let go at some point of the familiar, of what we've known. And we have to then be prepared to open up to a very different experience. So that was one image. And then the other image was, I mean, you've probably all experienced this probably, but of being on a plane. And particularly when the plane's just arriving into the wherever it's landing, and at some point you start seeing, first you just see big sort of fields and things like that, and then you start seeing the houses and, you know, the roads and a bit more detail. And, you know, I don't know, it happens pretty much most times when I'm in a plane, that I'll look and I'll see these houses and I'll see these roads, and I just think, God, there's all these lives happening in those little boxes. Is that happening? There's lots, a few nods in the room. There's all these lives happening in all these boxes, and I'm one of those people in one of those boxes as well. And when I'm down there, and all these sort of, you know, life and death is happening in all these different ways. Hope and joy is happening, and pain and suffering is happening. It's all these dramas are being played out in these little boxes and on these fields and roads. And from the vantage point of the plane, everything looks very equal. Like everyone's going through the sort of similar experience somehow or other in these boxes, just playing out their lives in these different ways. So that's another thing. When you're in a higher sort of vantage point, you look down and you just experience it differently. You think, gosh, there's all these dramas playing out, and we're not aware of. It's a bit like, actually, the other image that came to mind was ants. You know, if you're ever looking at ants carrying food and doing their whatever, living their lives, suddenly it's kind of like, gosh, are they aware that I'm looking at them? Are they aware that this whole world here, are they? Are they not? I don't know. But they're so involved, aren't they? They're so involved in their lives. And that's a bit like what I have on the plane. Like, we're so involved in our lives, and yet there's this whole vista of space and experience where if we look at it from a different vantage point, we experience our lives a bit differently. So that was a second image. And then I had a completely different one of a roller coaster. I have enjoyed being on roller coasters when I was younger. And basically you get on a roller coaster, you'd be a bit nervous, excited, and then the fear would set in, right? And then you literally find yourself upside down. And you don't know how you're going to respond. You know, you don't know how you're going to respond to being upside down, but it's thrilling and scary. And you want to land safely back, but at the same time you're enjoying the ride. So that was another image. And the last one that came to mind, actually it was a radio interview I heard of the person who spent the longest in space. And she was asked, this astronaut was asked, what's your most memorable moment, most memorable experience in space? And it was very interesting, her answer, actually. She said that it was the sunrise. It was seeing the sunrise, you know, going over the Earth each day that really was thrilling for her. And in space, it's completely black, of course, and there's the stars. But gradually the stars would get it gets slightly brighter, and then she'd see a sort of sliver of silver over a horizon, and then suddenly the sun would just emerge, and it would like chase the darkness from one part of the earth to another until it was lit, and it just was very beautiful. And so she said that when she sees the sun rise, it's awe-inspiring for her. You know, and it's really stuck with me because I think, gosh, actually, when I'm now looking at the sun rising, you know, just remember there's this whole phenomena that's occurring that if we're really with it, it's actually very magical. But again, we're like the ants in our daily lives. Like, oh, it's a bright sun today, I'm going to get on with one's life. And not really take in the majesty of all of this. So images of freedom in different ways, and the kind of experience of accessing freedom and what goes on in it. These are what occur to me. And all of those things have the letting go, the need to let go, the fear that might be there, the perspective that comes in when you do let go, the awesomeness of freedom when you actually begin to get a taste of it. But that journey of, I need to let go in order to get there. I need to experience some fear, maybe, in order to get there. That is part of this transition experience from suffering to freedom. So, this book, The Tales of Freedom. So, the story we're going to look at today is from the 11th century India. And in a way, it brings out a few of the things that I've spoken about, I think, already. And it certainly, I think, if we apply the story to ourselves, gives us a few ways to navigate this transition from suffering to freedom. And I think the more familiar we are with what goes on in trying to grow, what goes on in trying to access freedom from our limitations, freedom from suffering, freedom from fear, the more when we're experiencing it, we sort of, this is this. And we can get less freaked out by it, or we feel ready to kind of go on the journey. So we are in 11th century India, and we're meeting a man called Naropa. And Naropa was, as a child, he already was interested in Buddhism, in meditation, and he was already studying from, I think, 8 years old with Buddhist teachers. But when he turned of age, when he turned 18, his parents said he had to get married. So he got married to a woman who was also interested in meditation and the Dharma. And so, they were practicing together. But after a while, they kind of wanted to go their separate ways. So they separated, and she went off to practice, and he went off to practice, pursue his studies singly. And he wound up at a place called Nalanda Monastery, which was actually like a university of 10,000 monks, which that sort of shows you the sort of heyday of Buddhism in India. 10,000 monks in this one university. So he sort of winds up there, and he's really highly intelligent. He's come from a royal family, so he's had the best and the most privileges of upbringings, and highly intelligent. And he basically is able to, they used to have probably still do in some places, like have this debating tradition where they challenge you in terms of what you know, and he was an expert at that. So he was an expert at Buddhist logic and philosophy and all kinds of things. And so he basically rises through the ranks at this university, and eventually becomes the abbot. And that's probably no small feat. 10,000 strong, institution. He becomes the abbot. He becomes the person who's really leading everyone else, really giving their spiritual inspiration, dharmic inspiration to all the followers. And he was highly popular. He was highly respected for his learning, for his understanding, for his commitment. And all's going well, of course. And then one day he's in his study, and the story says he was sitting poring over his books with his back to the sun. And in all these stories, everything's a bit symbolic, okay? So his back is to the sun, he's poring over his books. And as he's poring over his books, a shadow is cast, and he sees the shadow of a figure. It just appears out of nowhere. And I'm going to read the description of this figure that appears out of nowhere. And you can imagine if you're sitting reading your books, and this figure is cast, what your response would be. So it says, her eyes were red and deep hollowed. Her hair was fox-coloured and dishevelled. Her forehead large and protruding. Her face had many wrinkles and was shrivelled up. Her ears were long and lumpy. Her nose was twisted and inflamed. She had a yellow beard, streaked with white. Her mouth was distorted and gaping. Her teeth were turned in and decayed. Her tongue made chewing movements and moistened her lips. She made sucking noises and licked her lips. She whistled when she yawned. She was weeping, and tears ran down her cheeks. She was shivering and panting her breath. Her complexion was darkish blue, her skin rough and thick, her body bent and askew, her neck curved. She was hump-backed, and being lame, she supported herself on a stick. So that shadow appears. Naropa turns around and is met with this woman. It's quite interesting what his response is, because, if it's a traditional fairy tale stories, you get these kind of scenes in fairy tales. The person who meets that figure would normally be terrified, right? Or they would recoil in disgust. I mean, there's a blue woman with a yellow beard, a twisted nose, not your usual character, and it's also she's appeared from nowhere. He's in the middle of his 10,000 strong, monastery, and this woman appears right in his study, and she's looking like that. So most stories would be like, they'd run, they'd recoil, they'd be like, who are you? All of this kind of thing. That doesn't happen in this story. It's quite interesting. She just says, oh, what you reading? It's very sort of like, what you into, what you're looking at, what you're into, what you're reading. And he just responds. So he just enters dialogue with her, quite quickly. Oh, some Buddhist logic. Oh, she says, okay. Do you understand the words or the meaning? And he says he understands the words. And she's delighted. She's clapping her hands. She runs around the room singing. She throws a stick in the air. She's just delighted when he says that. And he's like, oh, that's good. I've kind of, he's pleased her. So he then goes, oh, I understand the meaning as well. And then she's crestfallen. And she starts wanting to weep. And she throws a stick on the ground. So he's really confused by this. He's like, he says, I'm confused. I'm confused. When I said I answered the words, you seem really happy. Now I've told you I actually understand the meaning, you seem really sad. What's happening? So she says, I was pleased when you said you understood the words, because that was true. I know you understand the literal sense of the words. But when you said you understand the meaning, that's a lie. You don't understand the meaning of this. You don't understand the meaning of what you're studying. And he's like, I imagine in his mind, he's like, I'm the abbot. And if I don't understand it, I have to understand it, because if I don't understand it, nobody else here does. And Nalanda University was like the preeminent university as well. So he says to her, well, who do you think does understand it then? She said, oh, my brother. And then she disappears in a rainbow cloud. So that's the story. And Naropa's world turns upside down at this point, because he knows He just intuitively, he's a spiritually mature man. You can already see that because he didn't recoil from her. That would have been out of fear. So he didn't have that kind of same kind of fear. He didn't recoil. He didn't have to discuss. He engaged with her straight away. He didn't even say, hey, how did you get in here? Or anything like that. All those conventions weren't there. So he was able to be present to her, who she was straight away. So there's already a level of spiritual maturity there. And because he's spiritually mature, because he has been practicing, he knows that what she's saying is the truth. He knows that he can teach this stuff, he can tell people all about it, but he knows he doesn't really understand the depth of its meaning. And that throws his world into chaos, really, because what does he do? Does he carry on being the abbot, the expert, the person who's supposed to teach everybody this stuff when he knows he doesn't understand it? Really? Does he carry on with that? Or does he do what is already beckoning him and leaves? Which is what he does. He basically decides that that's it. That's the end of his abbotship. That's the end of his role. He needs to go in search of freedom and meaning, real meaning and understanding. So that's such a challenge, isn't it? That's such a challenge to do that. I mean, I can imagine that before then, he was one of these people that you think, well, he's at the pinnacle. He probably set his own challenges, his own sort of interesting questions, and then would work towards that. But suddenly he is challenged by this unknown woman, and she teaches him something that nothing else in the whole setting can teach him, and he has to leave behind his status, his reputation, all his followers. And they would have appealed to him. They would have begged him. They would have argued with him. They would have said, how are we going to cope without you? But he's prepared to do that. He's prepared to do that because actually his quest is freedom. And he is in touch with that enough to know that actually at that moment, his situation is not going to give him that. And he goes in search of what is going to be his teacher, this woman's brother, a man called Tilopa, and that's a whole nother story about how they met. And Tilopa was quite a character, completely unconventional, and Naropa goes on quite a journey. But because of his journey, he was able to really, develop the Buddhism in a particular way. And now there's many schools of Buddhism, really that sort of, and lots of teachings that come from his sort of work, really. So yes, really quite a pivotal point for him. He wants to understand the truth, and the fact that when it says his back, he had his back to the sun. That's a massive clue right there. Because that sun is a symbol for enlightenment, for awakening, the light chasing the darkness, if you like. And he's got his back to it, poring over his books, and he's recognised that really he needs to turn towards the sun. And that's where he goes in search of Tilopa. So what can we get from this then? What's the relevance for us on our journeys, wherever your journey is? Well, the first thing that Vasantra pulls out this book, which I think is really important, is the importance of motivation. Motivation, or another word to say, the honeymoon ends. The honeymoon ends, and we have to be prepared to be uncomfortable. So the honeymoon ends. What's that? This happens again and again. It happened to me. It happens to so many people. They come along to meditation and Buddhism. If you're new, this might not have happened to you yet, so that's great. You can have your honeymoon, enjoy it. But you come along to meditation and Buddhism. You get some experience in meditation. Maybe you go on a retreat, and suddenly, gosh, the world opens up. You realise you can work with your mind. You realise you can train your mind. You realise you can actually be with your emotions in a way that's actually really helpful and constructive. You realise the whole wealth of Buddhism and all these teachings. You might even enjoy ritual and really think, gosh, there's a whole dimension of experience that I'm just not engaged in a positive way before. So much opens up, and it can be really exciting. For some people it's instant, for other people it's very gradual, but nonetheless there's often a period where, wow, isn't meditation amazing? Isn't Buddhism amazing? I'm learning all these things, everything's new. But at some point, and again it happens in different ways for different people, but at some point you think, yeah, meditation, you get on your cushion, yeah, even going on retreat, yeah, I know what to expect. I know people, I know meditation, I know what the Dharma says, I know all about the Four Noble Truths, I know all about this, I know all about that, and it can begin to feel a bit like flat, or that you're just going through the motions because, yeah, you know it, really. And in a way, if that happens, that's a sign. Some people at that point think, oh well, there's not much more for me here, actually, and that's where some people think, actually, I'm off, and that's okay in a sense, because in a way, some people do come. You might have come because of stress or just being unhappy, and actually you get, more relaxed, and you learn to deal with your mind a bit more, and life feels a bit more together, and you can focus a bit more, and actually you can begin to engage more happily in life, and suddenly it's like, oh, great. And at that point you might think, actually, you might forget why you started meditating. You might forget at that point, or you feel like you've achieved it. And some people leave at that point, leave the path or practice at that point. For others, keep going through this kind of, yeah, it's okay, or this kind of flat experience, or you're point where you're not learning anything new. And that's a really important point in the path. That's a point, rather than thinking, oh, it's not working, or I know it all. It's a point of going, oh, I need to look at what my motivation is. Sometimes our motivation has to shift, has to get deeper, has to be refined even, and you have to get deeper roots for why you're doing what you're doing. So maybe you're not stressed in the way that you were, when you started meditating. So what else potential is there for you? What other possibilities are there for you? So sort of exploring that a bit deeper, and then finding a deeper place in which to practice, really. And in a way, you could see that the whole path is a series of having to go, okay, why am I doing what I'm doing? What else is there for me? What else can I open up in my mind, in my heart, in my life? That's actually sort of, rather than like, oh, this is what I want for meditation and Buddhism, the path starts opening up. Each time you do that, the path opens up wider and wider and wider. So that is looking at one's motivation. And I've certainly done that several times, in my life. And each time it's an important point. But also, sometimes you might have been around for, a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I mean, there's people here at the Buddhist Centre who've been practicing for 40 plus 50 years. Yeah, all look over in that corner, David Mitchell. 50 years, I mean, amazing. And by that time, you do know a lot, actually. By that time, you've read a lot, you've been on loads of retreats, you might have one of these, you might have a special name, you might teach, people might go, oh yeah, you're very inspiring. All these things can happen. You might have a role, a function that you carry out. Or you might just be like, this is my life, and this is how I practice, and this is how it works. And that's great, you've achieved that, that's really positive. And even then, it's important to go, actually, am I settling down here? Have I gotten really comfortable? Have I just gotten used to a certain way of being and doing that, and I'm no longer really challenging myself? Do I think I know it all, like on some level? And in a way, that's what happens to Naropa in the story, isn't it? He's at that point where he's pretty comfortable, He might be setting his own challenges, and he might be challenging one in a place of 10,000 monks. I'm sure it had its issues. But nonetheless, he's pretty comfortable. And he recognises that is actually, at that point, getting in the way of further freedom. So he has to be prepared to start all over. That's what he does by leaving. He's prepared. He's not starting his journey all over, but he's starting this point of his journey all over again, prepared to learn it all again, all anew. And that's a really important point in practice, being prepared to learn it all anew. And they call it beginner's mind as well, where you are really engaging freshly with things. So motivation, being aware of what our motivation is for practice and being prepared to deepen it, refine it as time goes on. So the second thing is when this woman says, do you understand the words or the meaning? And she gets upset with him and says, actually, you're lying. I mean, that's quite a thing to say. He knows that she's telling the truth. He knows that's right. Not that he's consciously lying, not that he's consciously going, well, I don't understand the words. Of course not. It's that he understands there's a difference between knowledge and direct experience. He understands there's a difference between what we intellectually, rationally, conceptually understand and what we actually know fully in our experience. And again, this is a really important part of the journey to freedom, is actually recognising that for whatever we learn, for it to actually become part of who we are, we have to experience it. There's no way of avoiding the process of experience. And I think this came up on our retreat again recently, where someone said, actually, we want happiness, we want all these things, but we don't always want the process of getting there. We just want to arrive there somehow or other. Because the process it can be challenging. It's very engaging because we're actually understanding ourselves. We're understanding ourselves, how the mind and heart works. There's nothing more engaging in my view, but it can be challenging. But going through the process means that it becomes your experience. You know it for yourself. No one has to tell you. You've been there. You've done it. It's not something you've read and thought, oh, that sounds nice. It's something you've actually been through. And we know, don't we, that when we go for an experience, whatever the experience is, we know we learn at a whole deeper level. And that often, the more you go for an experience, the more that experience stays with you. And that's kind of what we want with the Dharma. We want the experience to stay with us, for it to permeate our lives. But for the only way that to happen is if we actually go through the experience, and sometimes again and again. So, and it's actually really moving. I find this very moving, on retreat, where at the end of an experience, so, the retreats that people come up and they share their experience. And particularly on meditation retreats, because meditation retreats, when there's lots of silence, you're just with yourself. You're with yourself and you're with whatever teaching or practice you're doing, but you're really just with yourself. And you just have to be with yourself. And at the end, something happens. Something always happens, on retreat. And by the end, you're like, I now understand metta. I now understand love. I recognise I can love myself. I now know how it is to really connect with another. I know what it feels like to be alive to nature, to be really connected to nature around me. This is all real experiences that people have, and it's you only need a few moments like that for transformation to occur. So that's our motivation, and then that's our knowledge, not mistaking knowledge for direct experience. And the Buddha, what I like about the Buddha stories, he teaches the historical Buddha. You've got lots of cases of him teaching all kinds of people from, really the preeminent royal kings and queens to, people that are literate, that are cast out of society, who have not had any learning at all, and he gives them all appropriate teachings. And there's one story, I don't know if you know the name of this story, David Mitchell, but one story I like where the Buddha's teaching, there's somebody who sweeps, who job is sweeping, and they say, oh, the monks around him say, oh, he's just not quite got it up there, to kind of really understand the teachings. And the Buddha's like, no, everyone can learn. So he gives them a teaching and just says, every time you sweep, think of this teaching and just repeat it to yourself. And so he's very faithful, this person. So he faithfully sweeps and he faithfully remembers and brings to mind this teaching. And of course, he grows from it. He sees, he understands. So we don't need a lot of knowledge. We don't need it's great to study the Dharma. It's great to learn lots of things. But we only need a few teachings, 1 or 2 even, bringing them to heart, applying them to our actual lives, and learning, transformation comes. So a third thing we can take away, so we've got motivation, not mistaking knowledge for direct experience. Well, I think the other one, the next one, is connected to it. And Vasantra calls it, what does he call it? He calls it covering our experience in sticky labels. That's what he calls it, covering our experience in sticky labels. So this is to do with the fact that one of the reasons we do mistake our knowledge for experience, for direct experience, is because we do engage with the world probably predominantly, our experience of the world is often filtered by concepts, by our rational mind. So whether I drove here today at the Buddhist Centre, so I'm already putting lots of labels on my experience, and it happens automatically. So I'm like, I get into a thing called my car. I drive in this direction. I look at this sign. This sign means this. I'm labelling, my traffic lights mean this. I'm labelling my experience at every point. We have to do that just to navigate the world, right? It's a sort of natural thing that we do. However, he says what he says is covering our experience with sticky labels. So that suggests really that these labels that we impose or that's there on our experience is not the experience itself. We're just putting these labels on in order to function in the world. But that is not what experience or life or reality is. One way I like to talk about this is it's a kind of coaching management sort of tool, or which I find quite helpful to explain this a bit. And it's called the ladder of inference. And it sort of explains this very ancient teaching in a very contemporary way. So it basically says there's all this experience, this raw experience that we have. And then because there's so much of it, we have to select, we can't take it all in at any one point in time. So we're selecting all this experience that's around us. So I'm noticing certain things, I'm labeling certain things, but I'm also screening out quite a lot of other things as well, or just not even aware of a lot of other things. And once we've got this data, that's information that we gather in, we then have to interpret it. This means this. Tree means that, car means that, you mean this, I mean this, this chair means this. We sort of beginning to interpret our experience. When we interpret our experience, we're then adding some meaning to it, we're then forming assumptions, and then our assumptions become conclusions, and then we're drawing beliefs or views based on that. That happens like that, happens in an instant. I get in my car, I've got a whole set of interpretations, labelling that's going on around that. I navigate my way to the centre. Here I am. There's a whole lot of other labels going on around my experience. I'm making all kinds of meanings from this experience that I'm having right now in the way that you are. You probably are as well. That's all fine. However, the problem of that, there are some problems with that, and one of them is we are this selection. What are we basing the selection on? What are we taking and what are we screening out? And why is that? Are our assumptions and our interpretations correct? Not always. So the example he uses, for example, in the book is, somebody comes towards you and you're like, that's Anne, and you're already your friend Anne, or somebody Anne that you're not friends with. So there's already some labelling going on there. And you're already having a response based on whatever label you've put on Anne. And what happens, the more we do that, the more we fix Anne. Anne becomes, this is Anne, this is me, not just fixing Anne, we're fixing ourselves as well. This is me, this is Anne. Our relationship is like this, she's like this, I'm like that. We connect in this way, we don't connect in this way. And suddenly Anne can become very two-dimensional. What happens in meditation, and what practice is trying to get us to do, is to just recognize that Anne is so much more than the view that we have of Anne. Anne is so much more than the assumptions that we've made about Anne. Anne is so much more than the interpretations that we've made. We are so much more than the assumptions we've made about ourselves and how we've interpreted ourselves too. We've had labels on at various times. We've put labels on for various reasons, but are those labels still appropriate? Do they still fit the experience? Anne might be quite different to the Anne that you met yesterday, or last week, or last year, but we will still have that same label. So what meditation and Buddhism is trying to get us to do is go, recognize that there are labels you're putting on your experience, that you've formed views, and these views are become quite fixed, and recognize that that's not the real, experience. There's a whole nother way of relating that's not your label, that's not our views. And that already is freeing, because suddenly, if you recognise, actually, how am I right now? Actually, I'm not the same as I was this morning or yesterday. Let me connect with how I am now. Let me see if I can really engage with how Anne is appearing right now. Suddenly opens up a different level of possibility in the connection, in the communication. And you must have had this experience yourself where, I don't know, you've met people you've known years ago, and they're still relating to you in the way that you were, a few years ago. And it's really confining, it's really limiting, because I'm not like that anymore, I've changed. So when we can recognize the labels we put on and how we're fixing experience, we can also choose to go, that's just a label. Let me see what's really here. And that we can do that for everything. And that's why, again, I'm going to hark on about my retreat, because I had a lovely time on my retreat, but it was a first week retreat I'd been on for a long time. So it was great. But even like sitting in the garden and seeing a tree or plants could become quite a magical experience, because you're not just going, there's a tree. Yeah, that's a tree, or that's a plant, or that's a flower. You're really taking it in. You've removed your labels and going, what is this? What is this thing with these sort of colours and that movement and even that sound, just what is this? And you become so much more curious about experience. So we do have to label, we do this, but just recognise that we are doing it, and are our labels, are our views appropriate now? Can we be open to a new way of engaging with ourselves and others? So that's covering. And the last thing, the last point is to do with the woman in the story. Who is she? And what relevance has she got to us? So very interesting, this woman. A sort of typical character that you might get in a fairy tale. But the interaction between her and Naropa is not typical. The fact that he's like, almost like, hi, yeah, this is what I'm reading. That's kind of suddenly a bit different. And again, maybe what I just said about labels, maybe he's able to remove his labels. He's just greeting her as she is. And then he's able to be receptive to the message, the teaching that she's giving him. So, what Vasantra says in this book is that this woman represents a figure called the Dakini. And the Dakini in Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, is a sky dancing, often naked woman with long flowing hair, surrounded by flames, and she's ecstatic. She's ecstatic because she is really, drinking, consumed by love and wisdom and compassion, and it's sort of, she's fired up by it. And she's also symbolises, this figure sort of symbolises inspiration and spontaneity. So she also symbolises that as well. So this old woman, and the clue is that she disappears in not a puff of smoke, but in rainbow light. So that's a clue that, something special about her. So in a way, this woman represents inspiration, and it's inspiration that can be challenging. She's not appeared like the traditional figures. It's usually a beautiful woman with, as I said, long flowing hair and all of that, but she appears quite differently. In a way, this kind of inspiration appears in a way that says, come on, challenges you. Come on, there's more. There's more here. It's that kind of inspiration. There's different types of inspiration, but it's that inspiration that goes, you can do this and you need to do it, and really challenges you in that way. So she represents that, this old woman, this kind of like shows him the truth of his experience, is a mirror to him, is a mirror to his depths, and then says, there's more, and you need to go towards that freedom. So the traditional image has a number of different elements to it. So red, they're often red, these dakinis, and red symbolises emotion and being fully engaged, fully wholehearted. And if we've come to that point where we're either a bit like, life practice and meditation and Buddhism got a bit flat, then we need that kind of inspiration. We need to be shaken up a little bit and, actually find those deeper roots. And that kind of inspiration does that. We need to emotionally engage with our lives, emotionally engage with practice, really, get ourselves fully in there. So it's not cerebral, it's not rational, it's not intellectual, it's full-blooded, as you were, passionate engagement. So that's what the red symbolises. She's naked. The traditional images are naked, and that symbolises willingness to see the truth. If you one's naked, you're seeing the full you, aren't you? As you are. You're not sort of covering over with all nice things and you're actually, this is how I am. This is really what's going on. So that's what the nakedness symbolises, just seeing things as they really are and being a mirror in that way. She's dancing. The traditional figures dance. And actually this figure, the old woman, dances as well, doesn't she? She dances with glee at some points. And this symbolises that sort of creative, spontaneous energy as well that inspiration can give you. So it takes you from like, I don't know. I know freedom's beckoning. I know I can change. I know I want to let go of my limits. I let go of my normal ways of doing things. I know I can. And then once you start, then you get inspired. Then you think, gosh, this is great. You get fully engaged and then you get creative. The mind opens up, heart opens up. So that's what the dancing represents. And what else? The flames. The flames represent transformation. If you're doing all of that, if you're willing to see the truth of your experience, however it is, however uncomfortable that is, if you're willing to emotionally engage, if you're willing to allow creative energies to come through, then transformation, change is actually going to happen. And then, of course, that can be, you don't recognise yourself sometimes, after a while. You don't think, I'm really different. Things have really changed in my life. I've really changed. So, we've been on a bit of a journey with this story, and really pulling out the sort of this transition, suffering to freedom, and some of the things to bear in mind: motivation, having direct experience, using our knowledge to help us with that direct experience, but not mistaking the two, recognizing that we fix and we label experience, but there's a whole other way of relating to reality that's so much more richer, and then being open to the dakini, being open to the truth coming through, coming through in this with this burst of inspiration that might be a bit challenging, but once we with it, it takes us into real transformation. That's all I want to say today. So in a way, that's the story. The world turned upside down. In a way, if things transform in that way, the world is turned upside down. But it's the kind of upside down or the kind of perspective that really we're not on the ground in the minutiae of our experience anymore. We are much more open to this expanse of space and a perspective. And maybe we get a glimpse as well of that sort of awe of the sun, the light chasing the darkness that we heard about in The Astronaut. Thank you.